I never imagined that silence could feel so loud. The sterile walls around me held every whispered secret and muffled cry, echoing in an emptiness that seemed to swallow any trace of warmth. Each day blended into the next, marked only by the steps of nurses, the measured doses of medication, and the cold clatter of trays. My world had shrunk to this institution, a cage dressed in the pretense of care, where sunlight was a visitor, never a resident. I traced the cracks and peeling paint on the wall, memorizing the way the shadows moved through the small barred window. I was a ghost haunting my own life, a mother stripped of family, authority, and even her own name. My hands, once steady and strong from years of sacrifice and tender care, now trembled slightly as they rested on the thin blanket covering my lap. I closed my eyes, letting memories surge like waves. The warmth of a kitchen filled with laughter, the scent of fresh bread baking. The way Jacob's rough arms once held me after a long day, or Sarah's mischievous smile when she thought she was cleverer than me. These recollections were both refuge and torment, reminders of a life that seemed a distant dream. One afternoon, I was near the nurse's station under the dull buzz of fluorescent lights, pretending to read a book I could no longer focus on. The low murmur of voices drifted down the hall, a familiar cadence that pulled me from my reverie. I caught my breath. Jacob and Sarah, my children. The words they spoke cut through the silence like a knife. "They're only keeping her here because it's easier for us," Jacob said, voice casual, as if talking about the weather. Sarah laughed, brittle and harsh. "Yeah, once the house sells, everything will be set. No more worrying about her messing things up. Mom's gone in the head anyway." The world seemed to stop. My breath caught, locked tight in my chest. I gripped the edge of the plastic chair, nails biting into the fabric beneath. The betrayal crashed through me like a tidal wave, threatening to drown every fragile hope. The house I had built with my own hands, the home where we celebrated birthdays and fought silent battles over spilled milk and broken dreams, was to be sold off, liquidated, as if it were nothing but a ledger in a bank. They spoke of papers, lawyers, keys, as if I were already absent, erased from the equation. Silent, broken, powerless. They believed my confinement had stripped me of everything, my voice, my will, my right to anything that belonged to me. They fancied themselves caretakers, touting concern, but the venom behind their words was unmistakable. My body trembled, and the room spun until a heaviness settled deep in my lungs. I wanted to scream or cry, but those tears had already been shed, long ago in the quiet solitude of this place. Instead, a tide of shame flooded me, a shame not of my own doing, but born of their cold dismissal. The shattered trust of the years I had dedicated to holding our family together. I was their mother, yet to them I appeared nothing more than a burden to be discarded. Disbelief clouded my vision, followed by a raw, aching pain that blossomed into something fierce. But beneath that aching hurt, a spark began to glow. It was not anger, though it had its heat. It was not hopelessness, though it weighed heavily. It was clarity. They had underestimated me. My confinement was their greatest mistake. They thought that physical distance meant defeat, that isolation meant surrender. I was neither broken nor silent. I was watching, listening, learning. I swallowed the tears that threatened to fall and felt the weight on my chest turn into a steadfast anchor. My mind cleared, sharp and steady as the calm after a storm. Their betrayal laid bare more than just their greed. It revealed the deep cracks running through the family I had nurtured. Lies told behind closed doors, ambitions fueled by entitlement, and the coldness that replaced years of warmth and consolation. But through it all, beneath this fragile, labeled exterior, I remembered who I was. I was a mother, a woman who had endured far worse storms than this one. I would not let their judgment silence me. No longer did I care if they thought me powerless or broken. That misconception was mine to wield, a shield, a camouflage for the strength they failed to see. Every careless boast, every whispered plan was fuel for a fire they did not know I carried. That evening, as the institutional lights dimmed and the suffocating silence crept like a living shadow, I lay on my cot, listening to the uneven breaths of other patients around me. My thoughts turned to the house, the real home, the garden where I planted tulips for Sarah's birthday, now wild but still standing, the creaking staircase where Jacob had stumbled after chasing empty dreams, the worn kitchen table scarred with every meal. Every argument, every rushed apology whispered in the dark. They thought walls held only memories, but I knew they held my resolve. With a quiet, fierce vow, I promised myself that this story was far from over, not within these walls, not at the hands of those who wished me gone. They planned to sell not just a house, but my entire life chapter, to erase me without resistance. They were wrong. A mother's love, quiet yet impenetrable, runs deeper than greed. And from this silence, I would rise, one patient, measured step at a time. Apologies. These places were more than just reminders of the past. They were the foundation of my resolve. I began to map out in my mind the steps I needed to take to defend that home and reclaim my agency. The hidden safe behind the study's wood panel, the stacks of documents in the lawyer's office, the letters and papers I once kept carefully tucked away, all resources I could call upon when the time came. The lawyer, who had quietly stood by my side in difficult moments, became a beacon of hope in my strategy. Their labels, insane, incapable, broken, once stung like fresh wounds, but now I wore them like armor. My children's careless talk and assumption that I was powerless painted a veil of vulnerability that shielded my true intent. I would become invisible, a specter no one suspected. Yet beneath the surface a fire grew with every whispered plan I overheard, with every mention of selling, lawsuits, or papers. That fire was fueled not by hatred, but by the aching need to protect what was mine and to stand up against the injustice of their betrayal. Loneliness was a constant companion during these days. There were moments when the silence of the institution pressed down so heavily that tears surfaced, a longing for the family that had slipped through my fingers. But I did not allow despair to win. The pain was there, yes, but it was also the fuel that fed the slow unfolding of my fight. I learned to wear patience like a second skin. I knew the path to reclaiming my life would not be swift or easy. It would require the quiet accumulation of small victories, calculated moves, and unwavering vigilance. Theirs was a battle of force and entitlement. Mine was a war of wills and endurance. I rehearsed conversations in my mind, imagining how I would confront my children, not with shouts and tears, but with evidence, with quiet strength and unshakable calm. I knew they underestimated the depth of my resolve and the extent of my preparation. I remembered the lawyer's words from years earlier, that even when circumstances seemed bleak, control could be wrested back with the right knowledge and determination. Those words became my mantra. It was time to awaken the mother who refused to be erased. Their plans to dismantle my life, selling the home, accessing bank accounts, rewriting histories, would not succeed. Every intricate detail they thought hidden or dismissed was being reconstructed quietly in my mind, cataloged and stored for the day I would reclaim control. And so, in the dim light of my room, surrounded by quiet breaths and distant echoes, I made a vow. This story was far from over, not within these walls, not at their hands. A mother's love, quiet and impenetrable, flows beneath the surface of silence. It can neither be bought, sold, nor destroyed. I would rise from this silence, patient and determined, reclaiming my life, one steady, deliberate step at a time. The first time I spoke with Mr. Collins after that dreadful revelation, I felt a tremor beneath my calm, the weight of years pressing down all at once. But the part of me that had been silent, the part that had watched and calculated for months, now stirred concretely into action. The phone felt heavy against my ear, yet hearing his voice, steady and reassuring, gave me an anchor. "I've kept a copy of your will," Mr. Collins said, his words cutting through the fog that had numbed me. I hadn't known he still guarded that secret, tucked away like a precious relic. That will wasn't just paper, it was my lifeline, the key to unlocking the chains they were tightening around me. He detailed what he'd safeguarded, a document that, unlike the one my children seemed to believe controlled my fate, preserved my rights as long as I was proved capable. It wasn't just a piece of legal jargon, it was a testament to my strength, something my children had overlooked entirely, blinded by their greed. I listened intently as he explained how we could use this to document my mental clarity, the reality of my condition, and to subtly investigate Jacob's and Sarah's treacheries. It felt like the first breath of fresh air after suffocating underwater for too long. The law was no longer a distant, cold labyrinth. It was my weapon, my shield. We arranged ways to begin gathering evidence without alerting my children. Mr. Collins had contacts who could discreetly monitor financial transactions, ownership changes, and any attempts to move or sell the house. These details, the supposedly hidden moves, their secret meetings, would quietly piece together over time, a puzzle revealing true intentions. I didn't allow myself to be overwhelmed. Every document, every fiber of truth was to be collected patiently, methodically. I relished the almost meditative discipline of watching, waiting, and reconstructing. I was no longer a helpless figure trapped by circumstances, but a strategist quietly reclaiming her place. My mind reached back to the lessons I had absorbed over the years, the legal terms I had once found dry and alien, but now burned brightly within me. Terms like capacity, guardianship, power of attorney, and wills and trusts were no longer abstractions, but tools in my hand. When my children thought they had silenced me, erased me, they hadn't anticipated that I'd resurrect from the margins, armed with knowledge and support. The old Evelyn, the woman with patience and keen observation, was back. I spent hours thinking about how to document my increasing clarity of mind. Simple things at first, keeping a journal, noting my thoughts and plans, exercising mental discipline that even the sharpest critiques could not dismiss. Those writings would become the measurable proof later, the voice of the woman they refused to hear. Meanwhile, I pieced together facts about Jacob's and Sarah's reckless financial maneuvers. They had started selling off valuable possessions, converting assets without consulting me, moving funds under suspicious circumstances. Each transaction was a betrayal layered upon the last, but it also gave me the proof I needed to confront their deception. Behind closed doors, Sarah boasted about the easy money they were making, confident no one would stand against them. Jacob rationalized their greed as family business, ignoring the cold truth. They saw me as an obstacle, a woman reduced to silence, no longer the mother who had nurtured them. But in the quiet corners of that institution, I grew stronger with every revelation. I analyzed their weaknesses, their impatience, their arrogance, their need for quick gains. I began to craft a strategy that would use their strengths against them, exploiting their blind spots and misplaced confidence. I also reached out indirectly to those loyal to me, old friends and professionals who, despite distance and time, still recognized my mind and integrity. They offered subtle assistance, information, and encouragement. It was a clandestine network of hope, a support system woven together with trust and discretion. This intricate dance of planning required silence more than words. I became an expert in secrecy, using the quiet moments in therapy sessions or medical appointments to slip coded messages through trusted hands. Every piece of evidence we gathered, every note written, and every account analyzed was a small victory. Slowly, the balance of power began shifting from my children's hands back toward me. Like a chess player thinking several moves ahead, I kept my calm while setting traps using their own greed and complacency. The law was no longer a distant fortress, but a permeable shield in my defense. I took solace in the fact that, while they thought me fragile and incapable, the real strength lay beneath. The quiet mind weaving plans, the steady heart refusing defeat. Days became weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Progress was slow, but steady. I did not rush. Revenge, I realized, was not a blazing fire destroying everything at once, but a smoldering heat that consumes patiently, efficiently. My relationship with Mr. Collins deepened into a partnership, built on trust and understanding. He was my ally, not just in law, but in spirit, offering guidance where my own resolve faltered. Together, we devised ways to document every moment of clarity I demonstrated, anticipating the need to prove myself to both courts and family. During silent hours, I reimagined my return. I pictured walking through the familiar hallways of my house, touching the walls that had seen triumphs and heartbreak, reclaiming spaces they had tried to rewrite. I envisioned sitting at the kitchen table, no longer the fragile shadow, but the woman who had endured and conquered. That vision became my beacon, a promise not of vengeance born from hatred, but justice forged from quiet dignity and long endurance. Their underestimation of me was their downfall. They thought my silence meant weakness, that my absence meant consent. But beneath that silence was a mother's fierce heart, a woman steeped in patience and wisdom, waiting for the right moment to strike, not with fury, but with undeniable truth. The time to execute my plan was nearing. Every careful step, every hidden observation, and every documented proof was preparing me to reclaim not only my home, but my identity and honor. In that drawn-out season of quiet planning, I transformed. No longer the broken widow trapped in an institution, I became a strategist weaving the threads of my future, ready to confront the lies with evidence and the greed with justice. This was more than revenge, it was restoration, and I would see it through, quietly but surely, until my place was reclaimed and my children learned that their mother's strength could not be sold or silenced. The day I was allowed to leave the institution and return to the life I had been estranged from felt like every breath carried a mix of hope and weight. The sterile corridors gave way to familiar streets that had quietly changed in my absence. I was no longer the frail woman they believed I had become. Beneath the calm exterior simmered a patience born of quiet, unyielding resolve. Driving toward my home, the world seemed both foreign and intimate. The shops bearing new signs, the faded sidewalks, and the faces I barely recognized told of a life going on without me. Yet every step I was about to take was mine to reclaim. This wasn't mere return, it was a quiet conquest. When I saw the house, emotions tangled beneath my skin. The once pristine paint was faded and cracked, the garden untamed where I had nurtured blossoms. Despite the overt signs of neglect, I knew every corner held my history, my struggles, my victories. This house had borne witness to years of laughter and sorrow, and now it was the stage for my quiet reclaiming. Jacob met me at the doorway, his practiced concern stiff and brittle, a thin veil barely cloaking impatience. Behind him loomed Sarah, her forced smile a mirror of his false warmth. They believed they had me in their grasp, fragile, compliant, silenced. How wrong they were. "Mother, we're so glad you're home," Jacob said smoothly, his voice slicing through the thick tension like a rehearsed performance. I met his gaze steadily, offering no warmth, no invitation for sympathy, only the steady pulse of authority reclaimed. Inside, the house was heavy with unspoken accusations, invisible on the surface but etched into the air. Each room held memories layered with both love and betrayal. Evenings gathered around the worn kitchen table, whispered talks in the living room, silent cries muffled by time. This was my domain, and I was determined to restore it. That afternoon, Mr. Collins arrived with a quiet confidence that steadied me. He placed before us the duplicate will, an instrument of my rightful authority my children were blind to. They had bet everything on my disappearance, on the belief I was unable to act. But the paper on the table told a different story. Jacob's eyes darkened with fury barely restrained. Sarah's poised mask faltered, revealing a flash of disbelief that swiftly gave way to anger. Their miscalculation was now a clear vulnerability. Securing my finances became immediate and uncompromising priority. I moved quickly yet carefully, blocking unauthorized access, reviewing every account, reclaiming control piece by guarded piece. The monetary resources they had coveted and assumed were theirs were now firmly in my hands. Examining the contents of the house, I found that the most precious items had already been touched by their greed. But instead of despair, I saw opportunity, a careful strategy in motion. The antique lamp that had illuminated my late husband's study, once a symbol of our shared life, was now a declaration of control when placed on the auction block at my behest. The fine china, reserved for celebrations, now somewhat hastily sold, became more than objects. They were messages. Each transaction was deliberate, planned not out of desperation, but as a symbol of power reclaimed on my terms. These quiet acts of selling were more about asserting sovereignty than erasing memories. I reclaimed the narrative. Jacob and Sarah grew visibly restless around me, their impatient attempts to unsettle my resolve meeting only the strong calm I had cultivated. I refused to engage in their provocations, knowing my strength lay in patience and precision. In discreet conversations with Mr. Collins, we planned next steps carefully. Every move was measured, every action timed with care. This was no moment for recklessness. Late at night, sleep fled me as plots and contingencies shifted in my mind like pieces on a chessboard. The house, once simply a shelter, had transformed into a battleground. It had become a reflection of a war being waged, not with noise or fury, but with resilience and determination. Amidst the struggle, moments of peace peppered this turbulent return. I sat by the window overlooking the garden, feeling sunlight on my skin, drawing strength from the stubborn life that still thrived amid neglect. These small respites reminded me that growth, like victory, often begins in quiet resilience. Reflecting on my transformation, I felt the distance I'd traveled. From a woman dismissed, silenced, and confined, I had emerged as a strategist, quietly weaving the threads of my future from the shadows. My children had equated my absence with consent and weakness. How cruel a misjudgment! Beneath my silence lay a mother's fierce, enduring heart. Patience, wisdom, and preparation fed the quiet storm I was gathering. I waited for the right moment, not to lash out in rage, but to reveal undeniable truth. Each passing day strengthened my position, eroding the foundations of their schemes. The law and my resolve became pillars supporting my comeback. This house was no longer theirs to manipulate. It was mine, my refuge, my bastion. I was no longer the powerless mother they thought they knew. I was the woman who had waited, planned, and was now ready, steady, unyielding, and resolute. I was home. When I finally faced Jacob and Sarah in the living room, the heart of the home that had once been a sanctuary and had since become a battleground, the air swirled heavy with tension and unspoken accusations. I could feel it pressing down, a weight forged by years of betrayal, greed, and silence. They came bearing the semblance of concern, their voices soft and rehearsed, but beneath that veneer lay a desperate struggle to hold on to a grip that was slipping fast. They had rehearsed their lines well, attempting to portray devoted children, caring for a fragile mother, a woman they believed was diminished beyond recovery. But I was no longer weak, no longer the silent figure they assumed I would remain. Months of patient observation and meticulous planning had hardened me into a quiet force, steady and unyielding. Jacob's eyes burned with a flicker of frustration and disbelief as he saw me standing tall and resolute. Sarah's smile trembled at the edges, a mask flaking under the weight of exposure, revealing the turmoil that churned beneath. "Mother, everything we've done has been for your benefit," Jacob began, his tone laced with manufactured empathy, an attempt to cage me with false kindness. Sarah nodded quickly, echoing his sentiment, though her impatience and underlying contempt betrayed her. "We only wanted to protect what's yours," she said, though the words fell hollow. I listened as their empty platitudes hung in the space between us, brittle and breaking beneath the gravity of what had been hidden for so long. Their greed, thinly disguised as mercy, provoked a silent resolve in me to reveal the truth they feared. Without haste, I called forward Mr. Collins, my faithful ally in law and spirit. His arrival was a subtle shake to the room's fragile calm. The moment he produced the duplicate will, my children's carefully built defenses began to crack. That discreet document, unknown to Jacob and Sarah, held the undeniable truth. It reaffirmed that I maintained control over the house and assets as long as I remained competent, a fact they had either deliberately hidden or overlooked in their avarice. As the paper slid across the polished table, Jacob's jaw tightened and his complexion flushed with anger, while Sarah's wide, stunned eyes betrayed a slipping grasp on the narrative they'd tried to rewrite. Their plan to erase me, to compel my consent through absence and doubt, unraveled like a thread pulled taut. I spoke with calm, deliberate clarity. This house and all its possessions remain mine. No sale, no transactions, no decisions will take place without my explicit consent. Their protests were quick but weak, words struggling to hold ground against documentation and legal truth. I laid bare the evidence, the unauthorized sales of family heirlooms, the covert attempts to siphon funds, the disguising of greed beneath the falsehood of keeping the family intact. Each revelation was a precise strike, exposing their betrayal layer by layer. They attempted to cut me off, to distort reality with rehearsed denials and empty justifications, but my voice remained firm and unwavering. I answered each claim with facts, my quiet power a stark contrast to their scrambling desperation. I didn't merely accuse, I reminded them of the sacrifices I had made, the nights spent in exhaustion, the years of steadfast work, the dreams deferred for their futures. You believed my silence was weakness, absence was neglect, I told them softly, but a mother's strength never fades, it waits, it endures. Jacob's frustration flared, coloring his face with anger, while Sarah's sharp rebuttals revealed the fear beneath their arrogance. "You have changed," Sarah hissed, her voice rising with desperation. "Maybe you're no longer fit to make these decisions." The room held its breath at her words, a cruel attempt to diminish me once again. But I was no longer the woman they thought they could undermine. "I am the woman whose strength you ignored, who knew her rights even when blind to the world," I responded, unwavering. "You mistook my silence for defeat, but I was gathering strength for this moment." The shock that washed over their faces, an amalgam of disbelief, fury, and silent dread, spoke louder than any shout. The fragile family facade was crumbling under the weight of truth. This confrontation didn't explode in wild accusations or heated cries. Instead, it peeled away years of deceit until only raw realities remained exposed. They were no longer just my children. Now they were adversaries, caught in the quiet war I'd patiently waged. In this newfound space, silence took on profound meaning. The heavy silence of control reclaimed, of patience rewarded, of justice unfolding without noise. I stood taller than I ever had before, no longer a silent victim, but a matriarch armed with patience and strategy. Every move had been measured, Every word weighed, and now the truth was my weapon. The air around us shifted imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Old roles dissolved, revealing the stark truth. I was a woman who had endured betrayal, who had convinced herself to wait, to plan, and to rise. Their stunned faces were the echoes of their own undoing, testament to their deep miscalculation in underestimating the mother who silently gathered strength. I faced them not with bitterness, but with a fierce and steady resolve. This was my home, my legacy. Not a possession to be sold or manipulated, but a battleground I would defend. And I would win, not through fury, but through the quiet resilience of undeniable truth. The house seemed to breathe anew as Jacob and Sarah retreated, their defeat palpable in the silence they left behind. It was as if the walls, steeped in so many decades of laughter and sorrow, were exhaling a long-held breath alongside me. The weight of years lifted, replaced by an astonishing clarity and freedom I had almost forgotten was possible. No longer confined by silence, I found my voice rising steadily, soft yet unbreakable. This home that once felt like a prison was now my fortress again. Every familiar creak of the floorboards beneath my footsteps spoke of survival and renewal. Each faded corner held stories I was determined to reclaim and rewrite. Morning light poured through the windows with a warmth that awakened not just the rooms, but my spirit. Moving from room to room, I met memories both tender and painful, and faced them with a heart steadied by newfound strength. Outside, the garden flourished, stubborn tulips pushing through battered soil as if to remind me that resilience can flourish even in neglect. Small victories gathered, almost unnoticed by the world, calls that I now answered with confidence, meetings with steadfast lawyers, letters affirming my rights. These were the whispered affirmations that wove together the patchwork of restoration I was building. I found solace in the simplest of moments, the rich scent of coffee filling the kitchen, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the worn pages of a book I could finally read without interruption. These fragments of everyday life stitched a fabric of normalcy and peace around me, softening the edges of a long-fought battle. Though Jacob and Sarah lingered in the shadows of my past, their presence diminished. Their bold ambitions wilted under the weight of exposure and defeat. Whether born of grudging respect or mere fear, their retreat removed their power over me. I came to understand that justice was not only found in courts or documents. It meant setting myself free from years of pain and silence. It meant reclaiming who I was, shedding the burden of betrayal and tears, and embracing a future I could control. Slowly, the heavy fog of loss lifted, replaced by a quiet, determined peace. One afternoon, sitting by the window bathed in golden light, I let out a laugh, soft and unguarded, and felt a surge of joy I hadn't known in years. Tears followed, gentle and healing, born not of sorrow but of profound relief. I had survived. I had overcome. Silence had been my fortress and my sword. Through it, I forged a self more powerful and true than I had ever imagined possible. In that quiet, I found my freedom.